All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us here at Picking and Preparing Your Healthcare Proxy, Part 1. I'm Githoe Mina, Digital Director of Programs here at Compassion and Choices, the nation's oldest and largest nonprofit dedicated to improving care, expanding options, and empowering everyone to chart their end-of-life journey. Before I introduce you to today's wonderful speakers, we have a few housekeeping items so that you can get through this as efficiently as possible. If you need live captioning, either in English or Spanish, please enable it at the bottom of the screen by clicking on the double C's and following the prompts. If you have any questions, we actually have a Q&A box. So if you can go in and add your questions there, our speakers will be able to go in and answer them either live or by texting you the response. We will try to get to as many questions as we can, but if we can't get to all of them, we will cover them in part 2 or in the follow-up email. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded. So you'll be able to view it again if you have any questions. You can obviously take notes now. We will make the recording available to you afterwards. Now I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists. We have Meagan Williams, our Director of Clinical Education. Let me add her in right here. And then we have as well Osha Towers, our LGBTQ plus Engagement Director. Right. And now I'll hand it over to them to go over the content.
Thank you so much, Githoe. We are both incredibly excited to be able to offer this presentation to you all today. I know it's always a pleasure to do anything in partnership with Meagan, so we look forward to just a smooth transition through talking through what does it even mean to really have a healthcare proxy and the importance of that. But to start off, my name is Osha Towers. My pronouns are they, them. I'm based in San Diego, California, and I oversee the LGBTQ work here at Compassion and Choices as the LGBTQ Engagement Director.
And my name is Meagan Williams. My pronouns are she, her. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and my work is supporting our clinical engagement and outreach advocacy team, and specifically working on a lot of wonderful opportunities like this where we can bring great information to all sorts of people looking to learn more. I'm really, really excited to be here. Like Osha said, thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your names and where you are with us. It's so wonderful to have engagement already, to have you all interested in chatting with us. Like Githoe mentioned, we have a Q&A box at the bottom. So if you have questions, please drop them in there so that we don't lose your wonderful questions amid you all sharing with us. Thank you.
Beautiful. And to start off, just giving you all a rundown of an idea of what we're going to be going over today. We'll begin with talking through, again, what does it mean to have a healthcare proxy? What does that word even entail? And what are the steps to really picking that individual, making sure that they're prepared to offer this role for you? And not only prepare just in the logistics sense, but also feeling as though they're able to be that support for you. We'll go more in depth on actually taking on that role and all the steps for it in our next presentation in March 25th. But this one going through the introduction and the guide for as an individual, we know that it makes the world of a difference to actually have a designated individual to lead when you aren't able to speak for yourself as a healthcare proxy, but going more in depth. So it's not just this grand, oh, you should do this, but why should you do it and how do you start that journey? Our objectives and goals of today is to really, again, go through and feel confident in finding and selecting the right fit for you, and then determining, okay, are they ready? Are they willing? It's not just saying, sure, I'm going to do it. I love that. Whatever that entails, but really sitting down and digging through more of the logistics with it, and then feeling as though you have the tools to really offer some more guidance for that individual. And then the next presentation that they have the tools separate from taking on all the specifics of your role, but just feeling empowered as an individual to take on this role. So to start off, we're actually going to send it back to Githoe and Katie to throw in some poll questions for you that you all can offer some feedback for in the chat here. So the first one is, do you understand the role of healthcare proxy? Oh, I love that I can see it as it's coming in live. That's actually really cool. And I'm seeing a lot of yes and somewhat. If you are a no person, it is okay to share that too. I know sometimes it can be intimidating when you're seeing a lot of yeses. Okay, beautiful. Looks like everyone's answered that one. So we have 54% of folks saying yes, and we have 47% of folks saying somewhat. I have a general idea of that. I've heard that word before, but maybe going more deep in this presentation will be helpful. Thank you for sharing. And then for the next presentation or the next poll. So do you have a healthcare proxy? And that's always the kicker. It's one thing to know that you should and to be told that. It's another thing to really take the next step to actually finding that person. So I'm seeing a large sum of people saying yes. We still have 29% of folks that are saying no. And I think that that's really impressive. I know that when I asked this question in a room full of folks, there's way more folks that are like, oh, I really do know that I should, but I haven't necessarily selected that person yet, or I haven't put that down on paper yet. So I am impressed at any part of this step. Just to know what a healthcare proxy is a huge accomplishment to begin with. Beautiful. Okay, so 72%. Yeses, 28% no. So I'm going to take it back to my screen here.
Thank you.
So yeah, go for it, Megan.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for participating in that. I'm sure some of you, if you're on the phone or something, it might have been a challenge. Maybe you didn't get a chance to vote, but thank you so much. As we saw, a lot of you are familiar with the role of a healthcare proxy, but we just want to cover for folks who aren't and for those who might be watching this recording later. That for our purposes and while we're talking about it, a healthcare proxy is someone designated to make healthcare decisions for you if you are unable to do so for yourself. And choosing a proxy is for most people, for a lot of people, kind of a part of the advanced care planning process. And I do want to note, though, that we are speaking from our experiences, but across the country, there's different language used for this role. So in some states, it might be called a healthcare surrogate or representative or agent. They all kind of serve the same purpose. And in some states, the document themselves are called a proxy, whereas the person the paperwork you fill out is a proxy, but the person themselves is a representative or an agent, etc. So we just wanted to have that disclaimer. We'll be using the phrase proxy as we're talking about it, but in some states it might we might have slightly different language. But essentially, this person is making decisions for you if you are unable to do so, and their role is kind of is something that is not permanent, right? A proxy is going to serve for you if you're unable to speak for yourself, but then if you are comfortable and well again in a couple of days, that proxy is not going to need to make those decisions on your behalf. So it's a very a slightly fluid and kind of as needed basis, I suppose. So it is also slightly different from power of attorney in that way. Next slide, please. Thank you. One thing that we've seen in this research from JAMA that came out in 2020 has shown us that about 2 out of 3 US adults have not completed an advance directive. So obviously, those of you that are here with us today are in a very elite group. So only 1 out of 3 adults across the US has completed their directive is the estimate. And this process of completing an advance directive and going through all of the paperwork is what allows a lot of people to kind of identify their proxy but also identify the values and wishes that they need to share with their proxy. So we know that this is a really, really important thing. And a lot of research shows people recognize, yes, this is critical. I need it, and I haven't done it yet. And we recognize that is very common. It's normal. And we want to work to combat that a bit. So we then think about how do we kind of take this swell of interest? We have seen a rise since in 2020, when COVID began to take hold. Conversations and awareness about healthcare proxies and advanced care planning rose. Google results for both of those things have gone up steadily over the last 5 years since January of 2020. Searches for healthcare proxy meaning has actually gone up 450% in those years. And additional research like some that we've seen in JAMA and other articles have shown that there is an increase in advanced directives being completed, a lot of times for younger folks and for folks who are not terminally ill. And I think that that's very, it's interesting. We're interested in seeing more research about what it is that gets people to complete those documents and identify their proxies. But concerns around conversations about healthcare decision making are continuing to be pertinent and important. And completing these documents and identifying a proxy is a way for a lot of people to regain some sense of control and safety, but it can also feel very overwhelming. So taking that motivation to complete the thing and turning it into action is really challenging. And we are lucky that here at Compassionate Choices, we work with a lot of incredible people whose stories kind of give us insights into how and why these things are so important, and can often inspire or push other people to turn their motivation into action, including someone here on this slide.
Yeah, you see Deb Robertson and her wife featured here in this photo. And that was so intentional because I know both for myself and for Meagan, she is the epitome of somebody that is so deeply set on being an advocate for herself and her healthcare decisions and making sure that other people are advocates, and standing up to your point, take back some of that sense of power and control over our decisions, because I know that there's a lot of us that are feeling a loss of that right now. And again, it's the point that you made about seeing more young folks and folks that aren't terminally ill starting to be proactive about their healthcare decisions is wonderful, because we don't have to wait until a certain age or until a certain diagnosis. It means something to be able to actually do this ahead of time when our brain isn't fogged up with all of the other worries and stresses. But in this moment, I know that this is something that can really make an impact for folks to feel as though they have some extra level of security. So thank you to advocates like Deb Robertson here and other folks that are really helping us see, okay, yes, it's not enough to just say that's something I should do and need to do. Now is the time for me to actually make those steps happen.
Thank you. And so really, what can a proxy do? That is one of the most common questions, and these are some of the most basic and straightforward things that they do that are also the most impactful in a lot of ways. So obviously, like we said, making healthcare decisions based on your wishes. The idea here, of course, is that a proxy is able to go through your advance directive with you, understand what your wishes are for the end of life, or just for treatment, for pain, for anything that might come up. And for them to have a clear understanding out of crisis, not in a crisis state, but through a calm discussion and planning, that they would feel confident to understand your decisions enough to help make those for you if you were not able to make them on your own. They can also help identify healthcare providers and services for you. So if you might need a new provider or a specialist, or perhaps a long stay rehab facility, things like that, your healthcare proxy can help support making those decisions. They also do have access to your healthcare records and information. They can obtain those things, use them to get you resources. So that's something that's very important to note. Obviously, you want your healthcare proxy to know those things about you, but sometimes folks don't realize that that kind of comes with it. And of course, another element is them, honoring some of your post-death wishes, which might include organ donation or things like that. So there's somebody who kind of can understand the whole swath of things that you want after talking with you, understanding your reasons for your decision making, which are often just as important as the decision themselves, so that we can perhaps say, okay, we might not know how Meagan didn't answer this one thing, but we know how Meagan works, or we know why she made these other decisions. We can use that to make a good decision for her. So these are some of the main things that proxies can do and can be empowered to do on your behalf. Next slide. And then who can be a proxy? It's at least they have to be at least 18 years old. In some places it's 19. I think that might be the oldest, but I could be wrong. But I think there's at least 2 states where you have to be 19 years old. This is often a family member. People will often go with family members, but it is also often neighbors, a trusted friend, a lawyer, somebody at your knitting circle, somebody from church. And this person can be changed at any time. We'll address that later, but this person can be chosen, shifted, empowered to support you in other ways. There are kind of some general advisements from the American Bar Association around maybe the folks that are not advisable to choose to be your proxy, and that's for varying, ethical, legal reasons, but certainly not your healthcare provider themselves or their spouse or a staff member of their office. Any professional who's evaluating your decision making. So if that's somebody who needs to sign paperwork about your decision making, or somebody who would be asked by another professional about your capacity. And then also somebody who's already serving as a proxy for many other people. We'll get into this a little bit later when we talk about some resources for folks who might not have as many family-based resources or community-based resources with them. But there are some folks who serve in this role for people, and if that person is serving as a proxy for multiple other people who are also experiencing or navigating healthcare situations, that might not be the right time for them to support you. So that's just something else to flag.
I love the point in this too about a trusted friend, and just in general, after looking at that last slide, seeing how much access to information and how much responsibility this person has, really making sure that this is someone that you trust to show up for you and share all of those things with, and be able to make those decisions in the time that it's needed. And again, when thinking about why this is so incredibly important, I want to kind of take a step back from even thinking about end of life, because I know sometimes we talk about end of life decisions and it might feel too grand or too out of reach, right? And many of us may have never had a large surgery or have a lot of healthcare experiences. So when thinking about the relevance of having somebody to be in charge of speaking on your behalf and making decisions for you, I would love for you all to even just reflect on a personal level, and if you want to share in the chat, but just taking a moment to think, what other instances are there that people speak up for us or people make decisions for us as individuals? And this can be something that's sweet and goofy. Maybe this is a friend that knows that you were or have been single for a while and they want to set you up with somebody else on a date, and they're going out of their way to hype you up and share more about how wonderful and amazing you are. This could be an instance of having someone in your life really go out of their way to offer you a gift or offer you care in a time of need when you're dealing with some other level of struggle. Maybe it's with work or grief, and you see the way that they show up for you, that feels so personal and clear, that they know so much about you and are able to access support for you in just the right specific types of ways. This could be an instance where maybe you got in trouble. Maybe it was at work. Maybe you can think back to a time when you were younger and someone is talking through discipline or accessing accountability for you. We have so many different instances where folks are speaking on our behalf or showing up for us and making decisions for us and showing us that they care, that go outside of even healthcare instances. And I think that it's fair to say that we know the ways that that feels supportive and when it doesn't. We can tell when somebody really knows us and has spent time with us and gets what our needs are. And when someone, even if they're really trying hard, they might just miss it because maybe we haven't had enough conversations with them about what our needs are or how you would like to be spoken about to someone that is a stranger, you know? So I say that to say, just having a moment of reflecting on how those experiences went and maybe what could have been helpful for that person to know proactively to better speak about you or support you or make decisions for you in that moment. And that is what I like to think through when thinking about how a healthcare proxy can really show up for us and how it might be helpful to ask some better questions of them or sit down and go through more scenarios and conversations with an individual before they need to just jump at it in the moment and have all the right answers and know exactly what you would need. Because if we have these conversations beforehand, then they have a better sense about you as an individual and how to better support you in those moments. For me, coming into this work of even just wanting to do anything with LGBTQ, end of life, and healthcare really started from seeing more and more individuals that weren't taken out of the role of being able to be that core person for an individual because they didn't specifically name healthcare proxies. So when I talk about this, it's really from seeing that experience and wanting to make sure that we get down on paper who that person is going to be and make sure that they're properly equipped to support us in all the right ways in that role.
Thank you, Osha. And I just want to flag somebody did share a really beautiful example of somebody trying to do something really nice and kind of missing the mark in the chat. And so I also want to mention, excuse me, sorry, I'm getting over whatever cold I think most of us are dealing with. Um, but you know, we also have instances where somebody might speak for you and they're talking over you and they're blatantly wrong. And maybe it's not, it feels more like a like a duty for them or a chore for them than them showing up for you. So again, thinking about what those things look like and feel like too, so that you can be aware of what you don't want, and the kinds of personality traits that you maybe do want.
Love that. Thank you, Meagan. And here is a quote from Lena Hammer that I always love to share out. But if you can't speak for yourself, be mindful of who you pick to speak for you. Choose someone you know will support your wishes and is willing to be an advocate for you. Which again goes back into making sure that we are correctly identifying someone that, to Meagan's point, makes us feel supported when making decisions for us and then speaking on our behalf. So some of the questions that we might want to ask ourselves when selecting that person is, first and foremost, are they assertive? And when I say that, I appreciate the term assertive because I think that's somebody that's getting things done and asking the right things. But I know sometimes that can feel like a negative thing. But when we talk about being assertive in healthcare settings when it comes to decision making, what we really mean is, are they someone that is able to show up for you and be an advocate? Name the things that you've already discussed that you want and push for those things to really happen. And not allow necessarily other, let's say, family members that might have different thoughts about what your needs should look like and should be versus what you've already named them to be. Or maybe this is about making sure that the healthcare team is really properly addressing your care. So we want someone that is able to just name those things and advocate for you in a strong way versus, oh, sure, whatever you guys choose, you just go for whatever you think is the best decision, right? Are they comfortable talking about death? And this might seem silly, but it is such a good question to be able to ask someone and make sure that they truly are prepared that talking about death is a part of it. Because we want to make sure that all conversations, this doesn't necessarily mean that having a healthcare proxy means that situations will solely lead to death, right? Healthcare proxies show up and then an individual can come to a state where they're fine and they're able to leave the hospital and they're able to go back into day-to-day life again, right? But having someone that is comfortable with discussing any and all outcomes is incredibly important. And that in and of itself is making sure this person is able to care for your needs in the full way possible. Do they live nearby in case of an emergency? I think this question is really important because you might have a amazing, strong advocate, best friend, best like caregiver and support, but they live on the other side of the country. And that is wonderful. And it's so important to be able to have that person in your life. And it can be helpful to have conversations about, okay, but still, if something comes up and you're able to get here, that's fantastic. And I would love to still have this person as a support in the room with me and still walking through conversations with other folks. But in a case of an emergency where you need to have decisions happen immediately, we might not have time to wait for someone that is hours or flights away, right? Certain things might need to happen more quickly. So making sure that you have somebody that is able to access you quickly. And the last thing here to really be thinking about, and there's so many good questions to cover, but these are some of the top questions that we consider when starting this conversation. But the biggest one to me is, will they respect your decisions? We are surrounded with so much support and people that can care for us and care about us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they stand by all the decisions that we make in our lives, right? But when it comes to your healthcare, you want to feel confident that this person is going to respect your choices and decisions, even if they're not necessarily the ones that they would make for themselves. Even if it was up to them, they might say something totally different, but they can accept that in this moment, it is not about them. It's not about catering to everyone else in the room. It's about you and the choices that you've already discussed that you want to happen for your care. And will they or will they not honor that? And having that conversation proactively so you can know, okay, maybe this isn't the person for me. Or maybe we can have more of an open conversation about why this matters so much to you and why you hope you can get to a place where this person is able to show up and honor those decisions and therefore can continue to be your healthcare proxy. Megan, is there more that you want to say on this slide?
Yeah, I was gonna just jump in and say that, um, you know, I think that it also has to do with your personal decision. And actually, it's Peggy in the chat. It's like I paid her or something. She said, some people say that living nearby is not necessary because usually they just need to call a proxy. So I wanted to say, absolutely, some proxies live on the other side of the country. Absolutely. But if it's important to you that your proxy is nearby and can get to you physically quickly, that's something you should be considering in your, right? So if that's not as important to you, that doesn't need to be as big a factor in your decision making for who serves in that role for you. So I was going to say that. So thanks again, Peggy, for the for that. Because absolutely, if the right person who knows you best lives on the other side of the country, then that's a decision that you can absolutely make. I also wanted to say that I think there's a lot of times where people will kind of automatically, or I've heard this before, like, well, I don't have any family members with backgrounds in law or healthcare. I don't know anybody who knows the system or who understands how to make these things work. And I think really thinking about the what OSHA just outlined with some of the like personality traits of someone who can be a great proxy are somebody who, you know, can be assertive and organized, who knows you well. And so, regardless of that person's previous experience, if you go through this process with them and talk to them and share these questions and find out if they're on board to support you, I think you will be surprised. I think oftentimes we might have somebody in mind for proxy who is not the person who would actually be best for us. So, really thinking outside and thinking about personality traits or components of someone that you really admire. That those are the things that I try to look for in the person I chose to be my proxy. So.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for that note too, Peggy. And to this point too about choosing the right person, again, some of the things that we've covered here have already been named, but I know that these are a lot of the main questions that will often come up for folks when having this conversation. So even something like, well, does it have to be my spouse or my partner? And what if I don't have someone in an immediate circle to choose? And can I avoid others speaking for me? And is there an option to update or change your proxy? So some of these things we've already covered, but to just go a little bit more into it, for the first one, your healthcare proxy does not necessarily have to be a spouse or a partner or the person that you're married to. And some folks may choose that that might not necessarily be the right fit. As Megan mentioned earlier, maybe the characteristics and personality of your spouse are so wonderful and supportive and in so many other ways of being a spouse. But when showing up as a healthcare proxy, maybe someone else would be a better fit. Or maybe you are more interested in allowing room for your spouse to be able to show up in a different type of caregiver role for you, or allow the full rush of emotions and being present with that versus also including on the role of this responsibility of being a healthcare proxy. And one of the big questions that we talk about is, what if I don't have someone in my immediate circle to choose? And Megan and I can both speak on a variety of different options that are available to folks, but I want to be very transparent that this is a struggle. And it's something that a lot of people regularly will bring up to me when I'm doing presentations and having conversations, because it's hard, whether you're living somewhere that is further out from necessarily a city, or maybe your care team or your family or supporters aren't necessarily around or present, whatever the case may be. I recognize that this can be a struggle for a lot of individuals. But a couple of the ways that we think about getting around this is sometimes we can even look into, as Megan mentioned, maybe there's the knitting circle, or maybe there's spiritual or religious leaders that are interested in taking on this role, and that's something that also feels comfortable for you. Maybe this is a situation where you have a center or a network of local individuals that offer this as a service. Sometimes the services are at a cost, sometimes they're free. This is something that's worth looking into in your area. This can also be a situation where you can check out local things like doula support and end-of-life doulas as potentially being an option for offering care in this type of way. I know that sometimes we will also speak on hospice providers and social workers that offer support like this, or at least can help navigate people to other avenues of support for this. And one of the biggest things that I'll also just bring up to folks is, if you can't necessarily find someone, or if there isn't a space to select someone to be this person, really just digging deep on making sure that all of your information is documented and discussed even more thoroughly with your medical team. And that's always the advice, no matter what, even when also having a healthcare proxy, but having some more security and comfort in that when you might not necessarily have someone that you can select to be that person. Megan, is there more that you wanted to share with that?
Um, I think no, I agree with everything you said, but I think I will add that I have chosen. I'll share a little bit. Are we gonna get to that last? Should I just jump in to the last bullet point too?
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just share a couple points about myself and my own hubris as supporting people as a proxy. I am an end-of-life doula myself, which is what brought me to Compassion and Choices, first as a volunteer, and utilizing the resources with people that I was supporting. So I'm very comfortable talking about death. I'm very comfortable with this process for a lot of folks. I am also an only child, and my parents are both in their 70s. And I am also the partner to somebody who is 50 and unfortunately just experienced a very intense medical crisis about a year ago. And I served as proxy for that experience. And then about a month later, my mom had an incredibly scary, sudden crisis as well. And I realized that I could not serve as proxy for both of them while they were both receiving critical care so close to each other, which was very challenging for me to recognize about myself. And so I started thinking very differently about who I wanted my proxy to be. So my parents changed their proxy. We have another very capable loved one who stepped up to serve in that role for my parents for now, while I serve in that role for my partner. And that was, again, very hard for me at first because I felt bad, but I realized that that is my best service to them is to make sure that their proxy is somebody who is capable emotionally and mentally to do what needs to get done so that I can show up as their daughter in whatever capacity that might be, at whatever stage that is, whatever crisis we're navigating. Um, and so I just want to point out that it is okay to need to say I can't, and we're going to navigate that a little bit as well next. But it's also okay for that to change over time. And some folks have asked, I believe in the Q&A, is it okay to have two proxies? And I don't know, Osha, you can speak to that, or if Mickey, if you're aware, I'm not sure that there's any like necessarily directive. My understanding is that you can really only have one, but my statement is always that there is nothing wrong with a lot of people understanding what you want with one person being designated as the proxy. That is how I've always seen it done. And so I just want to add that then from in my experience then with my parents, I'm now a part of those conversations with their proxy. I can serve as additional support, backup, validation for that person. And I feel confident that that person knows what they want, and so do I, which is really, really empowering. But Mickey, I'd love if you have any thoughts to add on that. I'm not quite sure.
Sure, I'll add in a couple just because there's several questions about this as well, and I think we can take care of them in this section. So mostly it's determined by state law, how many proxies you can have and what the roles of those proxies will be. But to be clear, in most states, you are naming a single proxy and an alternate, right? So that if the person who is named as your single proxy does not get to bestow that onto other people if they choose not to do it, it goes to the alternate that you have named. There are some questions. So there was some questions about can you have a proxy who has for immediacy situations that is nearby, and then one who is like your actual proxy for making the decisions. And generally, that's not a good idea. Like you would probably have one person. What you can do, as Megan points out, we're huge fans of getting a lot of people involved in this and having everybody know what it is you want. And then make sure your proxy is connecting to those people. So you may say, I want the proxy to be local because that way they can advocate for me at the bedside in that situation if things go wrong, right? Because as Pamela points out, the hospital staff will call you generally, right? But if things go wrong, they don't necessarily call, and it's very difficult to call them. So it's sometimes better to have the proxy be the local person, who is in communication with the alternates and to other family members to be sure that everybody you're working on the collective behalf of the group on what your values are. But generally, you don't want to have multiple decision makers trying to come to consensus about what you might want. You really want that proxy who knows what you want.
Thank you, Mickey. And I
Right.
see some people have said in California you can have up to 3. So again, like Mickey said, I'm not a California gal, so I didn't realize that. So thank you for teaching me as well. That's wonderful. Thank you for helping with that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And thank you, Megan, too, for even sharing your own experience and being able to, I think that's impressive to take that step back. Be like, okay, actually, I want to make sure that my parents and everyone else around me gets the best sort of support and their care possible. So that includes being able to have someone else that steps up as being that healthcare proxy right now, and also you offering support as you can. I think that's really important to be able to name for folks that everything doesn't have to always go back to one person. We'll talk more about that in this follow-up to the series too, about knowing your own limitations with being a proxy.
Thank you.
And some of the other points on this slide too. So one of the things that I do like to talk with folks about as well is, can I avoid others speaking for me? That's something that some folks will want to name specifically and an advance directive of who's like in the room and who shouldn't be. And is there an option to update or change who your proxy is? And I know that Megan spoke on this earlier too, but making sure that if that ever needs to be changed based on whatever reason, maybe there are some changes in what your needs are and the person being able to best fulfill those, maybe some changes in certain decisions that you would like to make that other folks might be in a better place to make those decisions for you. Or again, maybe changes with distance, whatever it may be, this can be a fluid living document, and it should be in a role that just meets your best needs at the moment that they're available to this person. So just wanted to touch on that. And for this slide, just going to briefly go over this guide that we have for LGBTQ folks as an advanced care planning toolkit. And there's so many phenomenal resources in this and different tools for individuals. So it doesn't have to necessarily be solely if you're not a part of the LGBTQ community, don't look at it or something like that. This is supportive of all folks. So I like to be able to bring it up, but it just walks you through what does it even look like to ask someone to be your healthcare proxy, and offering some more guidance, because I know it can potentially feel intimidating to start the conversation. But this just walks you through some of those prompting questions to bring up and navigate. Okay, well, given their response based on this, it feels like maybe this continues to be somebody that would be a good fit for this role, or maybe not.
And I want to make sure to say that we will share the link to this resource in our follow-up to all of you, so you can explore that page. I know it's kind of hard to see, but we wanted you to see what it looks like so you can recognize it when you get to the guide. But it is just kind of a nice flow chart for kind of how to ask and how to navigate some of the responses you might get.
Absolutely. And included with other amazing tools and resources is a list of these ones here that Megan will speak more on.
Yeah, and we're also going to share these with you. These are the tools that we're going to go into a little bit more in depth in our next session, which is March 25th. But we want to flag these resources that are our Compassionate Choices End of Life Decisions Guide, the SAGE Planning Toolkit OSHA just shared, your specific state advance directive, because each of those are a little bit different. And so we're going to speak on some of those next time. So if we will share them out with you, and if you are interested in exploring those early, bringing your proxy with you to the next session to go over some of this, that would be wonderful. But most importantly, I really want to highlight that you are the most important person and part of supporting your proxy. As a proxy, having somebody who's willing to share the most their most intimate wishes and concerns and fears with you so that you can truly advocate for them is really, really special. And it is something that requires you to be present and fully at the table and engaging with them. And that is often the hardest part. That has been, again, even doing this work, that has been the hardest part for me, is sometimes just vocalizing those things out loud. So your presence and your engagement with them is the most important tool for support, but these are the things that we'll be diving into that, our end of life decisions guide is meant to be a tool and a resource to help you reach all of those, find all of those answers that you might need to find, but without being in crisis. We want you to explore those things in a intriguing and engaging and low stakes kind of way where you're just having a conversation and thinking about your values and the things that matter to you. So we believe that the guide is a wonderful tool for that. I've used it with the people that I have served as a proxy for and the people that I don't anymore. And I also, again, used it as an end of life doula with folks because it is such a wonderful tool to come together and like have this journey together where you're talking through things and feels it really helps you establish like a team, like you're a team together advocating for you. So we will make sure that these get sent out to you in our follow-up. And I know that we're towards the end and we do have a few more questions. And so I want to make sure, I think that's next, right, Osha?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yay.
yeah, you want me to give you a couple? Let's see.
Yeah, yeah, go one. Mickey, I see that. I think a few people have asked a few different times, and thank you for saying it. So I'm going to vocalize your answer, which is a few people have asked about the difference between a proxy and a power of attorney. So we just want to point out that they are the same. They get used kind of interchangeably sometimes. Both are responsible for healthcare decision making, but your power of attorney also oversees like financial and other elements of your life, whereas a healthcare proxy is just talking about healthcare decision making. And so that's something you're just documenting with your healthcare team, your hospital system, whatever. So it's just a slightly different, the becoming a full power of attorney is just a slightly different process. Please jump in if I've missed anything on that, but thank you for answering that, Mickey.
Yeah, there was one, and I know that you covered this, but maybe you could hit the highlights, Megan, again, which is for vulnerable populations, what are some of the for folks who may not have right available people who they could consider to be their proxy, what are some options for those folks? Yeah.
Yeah, OSHA spoke to a few of these, and OSHA, please jump in if I'm missing things. But there are, OSHA really emphasized, and I think I appreciate their validation of the fact that this is a legitimate concern and a legitimate issue in our country. Specifically, that we have a lot of people who don't have support around them at the end of life. So when that is the case, there are a lot of there are resources such as, No One Dies Alone, which is an organization that kind of is very specifically regarding regarding that. And that's more for when folks are like in active dying. And there are, OSHA mentioned there are doula groups, end of life doula groups, or, kind of collectives of end of life providers, some of whom offer this kind of support actually kind of like free outside of their doula services, but separate. Some people have that as part of their work. We also really encourage people to utilize resources they might have through their healthcare system. So if that's medical social workers or community health workers who might have resources into the community and other nonprofit organizations. We really encourage people to also think a little bit differently about, excuse me, about their community. So if that's, again, spiritual groups, there might be folks who are living through and living a life of sobriety, might have recovery groups that they're part of, that might be, you might meet somebody there who can support you in that way. So really thinking differently about about who those folks might be and thinking about the places where you feel most seen But again, that is a problem in our country as well, right? Is feelings of isolation and people not feeling connected. So it can feel really challenging to find folks, and that's why we encourage you to use all resources at hand, even if it is like OSHA emphasized at the very least, really emphasizing the self-advocacy and working with your healthcare provider so that they can be an advocate for you and really understand your wishes and your goals. And whenever we're able to do that, that is, another huge win.
This is a quickie. I hope it's a quickie. It'll be different in every state. It might be harder for some of you in some states, but how does someone literally name a proxy to make it legit? Do you know, like, do they have to register the proxy with someone? How does that happen?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Oh yeah, well, I was just going to share too that the healthcare proxy is a part of your advanced directive and being able to name that. And Meagan, do you want to share more about the specific? Because it is very helpful to know that that isn't a form that in the same type of way or like listing it in a database in a different um, application. But yeah, do you want to share more about that?
Yeah, so we encouraged you to check out, and we will also share a resource for you to find it. Every state has a different advanced directive form that will kind of allow you to identify who folks should be. And again, it will have those state-based differences, like where California allows you to add more folks. So we encourage you to check that out, but also identifying with your healthcare provider and your healthcare, network or hospital or wherever you receive care, identifying through them how they have that noted is also important. So sharing that information with your healthcare team so it can be noted, because that's also every single system notes those differently. Sometimes it's really easy to see, sometimes it's not. That kind of goes to Mickey's point earlier of, sometimes it's easier for them to identify proxies. Some healthcare systems yeah, they all do it differently, so it can be hard to give exact, but your state advanced directive form is what we always recommend people go to. And also, and then just in any healthcare form that you have, including your with your healthcare provider, your doctor's office, things like that, making sure that they're listed wherever available, wherever possible.
I am there's a couple of others like nurse advocates and fiduciaries. I don't think we talked about nurse advocates, did we? No?
No, I've not heard of nurse advocates. So is that a newer role?
So nurse advocates kind of came out of the palliative care movement. In that circle of care is like having a social worker or what was called at the time
Right.
nurse advocates
Okay.
who would perform the role within the palliative care setting of which is a patient-centered care model where your team is basically your care team is surrounds the patient and works with the patient to actually figure out what they want and how to move forward with their care. Sometimes a social worker or a nurse would play the role of being the patient advocate. So similar to your healthcare proxy, only not quote unquote working directly for you, and maybe not fully vested with your values and priorities in a way. I have not yet heard of nurse advocates becoming more like professional proxies or proxies for people myself, although I could just not have heard of that yet, and there may be folks out there. I'm a huge fan of the end of life doula movement, and that's who I'm with in terms of how I'm moving forward, in part because I want the objectivity of that doula being able to advocate on my behalf, and also not requiring my family have to like during an emotional time have to go through that process. So that's where I am. I don't think have either of you heard of Nurse Advocate? I don't think so, right? We
No,
haven't.
that's what I was unsure of. So
Yeah.
thank you. I hadn't heard of that role doing the proxy work, but I'm very interested. Very interested. Thank you. Yeah, and Diane, that's a good point. Yeah, I feel like acting healthcare providers often have I think that there's a lot of nuance about the roles that they fill. So I could see that. Diane mentioned that nobody on her hospice team would be able to function as a proxy, which makes sense. I believe one of the kind of guidelines or best practices from the Bar Association is also that it's not somebody working at a facility that's financially responsible for your care. So that could be a bit of a barrier. Yeah.
They weren't serving, just to be perfectly clear, they weren't serving as a proxy for the individual. They were just meant to kind of be looking
Yes.
out for the
Oh,
individual.
for the resource. Yes, yes. Just like social workers, you were saying. Yes, yes, yes. That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah, and I think,
Absolutely.
I think Megan, you said this as well, but for me, this is always about like what if things go wrong? Like, it's really it all works well when it all goes right. It's when things go wrong that you mostly want to be prepared, and have the right people in place, right? Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. And nobody wants to be doing that, putting things together while things are going bad. So
I think there was a quick question if we have time. We have about 1 minute. Could someone explain what how an end of life doula works?
I can try in a
I
minute.
happen to have one on the phone
Got
with
it.
me here. Go
Sure.
for it.
End of life doulas offer explicitly non-medical support at end of life. And sometimes that does include advocacy. Oftentimes it includes advocacy, I believe. And family care, legacy projects, all sorts of things. And doulas charge a wide variety. Some of them, like myself, don't charge. Others have an hourly rate. Others have kind of package rates for if you're doing end of life planning. So there's a wide variety. We've done some webinars on the topic in the past. I always recommend that folks check those out or check out the End of Life Doula Alliance, the National End of Life Doula Alliance. They're a wonderful organization that we partner with, and they do a lot of great support for end of life doulas and folks looking for them. And they have a directory online. Is that good? Is that what you needed?
That was great.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we'll definitely share out some more information. Huge fans of end of life doulas here, and we have several folks on staff that offer that support. And I see, Mickey, that you're adding in quick too, just about the importance of making sure that there are multiple folks that have access to your advanced directives. And again, this without having the healthcare proxy, the default is to your next of kin. So we want to make sure that people are aware of that and have somebody else that is able to show up as that person. But even if it's not, even if you don't necessarily want other folks to be your healthcare proxy, it's still important, whether they agree with your choices or not, to make sure that they know what your choices are. So there's less of that scramble in the event of things happening. So this was perfect. Thank you so much, Mickey, too, for jumping in to help answer some of those questions. And I know that we'll be sending more of a follow-up to offer some of those additional resources that we've named here today. And I'm sure, Gothoe, you're going to jump to that too. So thank you all for joining today and offering so much beautiful feedback and responses here in the chat too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to everyone on this call for participating. Thank you, Megan, Osha, and Mickey, for guiding us through this workshop and answering all the questions. As you're seeing in the chat, we're sharing some resources with you. For more information about Compassionate Choices, please check out our website, compassionatechoices.org. If you appreciate today's content and want to help us sustain our work, consider making a donation today at compassionatechoices.org/donate. And as we mentioned a few times, we will be doing the next workshop in this series Tuesday, March 25th at the same time, 4 p.m. Eastern. And we're dropping that link in the chat right now. So please be sure to sign up for that so you can hear even more tips about how to make sure that you and your healthcare proxy are prepared. We're going to end the webinar right now, but thank you again and for all of your support of Compassionate Choices. We look forward to seeing you next time.